In this second video, I'm going to take some time to talk about the actual behavior of people, the average person at our church in terms of engaging lostness. And so just as a quick refresher, in the first video, I just took a minute to talk with you about where we're at currently in the percentage of people that are engaged in serving or in small groups of any kind at the chapel and where we'd like them to be. And then I also talked about our conversion growth rate, which is something I think is really great to celebrate in the life of our church. Now in this second video, I want to talk with you about what does it look like for the average person at our church in a given year, what does the average person do as it relates to engaging lost people. So I'm going to talk about the average person, and then I'm going to differentiate between those that are involved in serving and in small groups in their missional behavior versus those that aren't involved in serving or in small groups. Because there's a reason why we push and encourage people to get involved in circle groups and small groups, and why we push people to get involved in serving either in the church or in the community. And the reason for that is, one, we see that it does contribute to a greater sense of spiritual formation and, most importantly, intimacy with God. But we also see that it grows their heart for engaging lostness. So while we have a roughly 28-29% conversion growth rate total at the chapel across our campuses, it's a very exciting thing for us to celebrate. But the reality is that the average person at the chapel does not necessarily engage lostness more than any of the other churches that we've surveyed in the United States. And we've surveyed a few hundred churches now. We've surveyed almost 40,000 evangelicals, and we've collected almost 4 million points of data that look at spiritual formation and missional behavior. And the reality is the chapel is just like the average church as it relates to total number of relationships built, the total number of proclamations of the gospel in a given year, and the total number of conversions that the average individual sees in a given year. So let's talk about that average first. Number one, the average person at the chapel, like when we just look at the church as a whole, is very likely to be building 2 individual relationships in a given year with unbelievers. Only 2 in a 12-month period. And as they're building those 2 intentional relationships, what we see is that the average person is building, or they're proclaiming the gospel twice in a given year. So let's just say hypothetically they're building 2 relationships, they share the gospel twice. So in those 2 relationships, maybe they share the gospel once with each of those people in a given year. And that means that they're probably proclaiming the gospel on average once every 6 months, okay? And that the average person leads nobody to Christ in a given year. Now, those numbers, we're not super excited about those numbers. There's always room for growth, and we want to grow those numbers for sure. But our numbers actually reflect what we see in the average church in America as a whole. So while we have this very high conversion growth rate, which we're really thankful for, one of the things that we're going to start focusing more on is our need to mobilize people into meaningful opportunities to engage lostness. And one of the best ways I see that happening is by getting people involved in small group communities and getting people involved in serving. Why? Well, when someone is involved in serving and in community at the chapel, so that you're either serving in the community or you're serving in the church and you're involved in a small group community, that average person is building 3 intentional relationships in a given year with unbelievers. Okay, so it's not 2, it's 3. And that individual is proclaiming the gospel 3 times. So instead of proclaiming the gospel once every 6 months, on average, someone who's involved in serving and involved in a community, involved in community, is sharing the gospel once every 4 months. Okay, so we still want this number to grow, understand that, but we see meaningful progress. Okay, and the average person that's serving and in a small group is seeing about 0 people come to know Christ in a given year. Now, let me just talk about conversion here. We don't control conversion. We live in the hope that God is going to lead people to Christ. We absolutely do. So I'm much more concerned with presence and proclamation than I am with conversion, because I feel like if we can grow presence and we can grow proclamation, God takes care of conversion. Okay? We need to be faithful to building relationships, to sharing truth, and we trust God for the outcome of whether they convert to the kingdom or not. We can't trick people into becoming Christians, okay? So, but you see a difference. You see, wow, that's, hey, instead of 2, it's 3 relationships. Instead of 2 proclamations, it's 3 proclamations. Well, let me show you the other side of those that are not serving and they're not in community. So that audience of people at the chapel, if you're not serving and you're not in a community of any kind, that person is building at best one intentional relationship with a believer in a given year. And in addition to that, they're proclaiming the gospel once in a 12-month trend. So, they fall below, the U.S. index, which is 220. They're one relationship built, one proclamation of the gospel in a year. And of course, they're not leading anybody to Christ. People don't come to Christ through osmosis, right? So, small groups and community, I might look at it this way. I would say, as a researcher, that the likelihood of you being more missional increases by 3 times if you're involved in community and if you're involved in serving. So that's why we talk about the importance of service, and that's why we talk about the importance of community and being in a circle group or a small group of some sort. In addition to that, I'm just talking about the missional behavior, but I also talked about this earlier. We see greater indexes toward spiritual formation in the lives of the people that are serving and in the lives of the people that are in community. And that biblically makes sense to us, right? If we're, John 13:34 talks about the world will know us by our love for one another. And imagine believers being able to experience Christ-like community with one another, okay? And if they're putting that on display, like we talk about in Matthew 5, the Gospel of Matthew talks about being salt and light in the world. If we're experiencing Christ-like love and Christ-like community as believers, okay, we're in community, and we're touching the lost places of Western New York, people will take notice. And they'll begin to ask the question, hey, what's different about you? And then it becomes a great opportunity for us to give proclamation of the gospel. So I actually shared this information with a quarterly gathering of small group leaders, circle group leaders, just this past week. And I misspoke during that time because I forgot to add in the people that were online in our online community. So I think I inflated the numbers just slightly. So I wanted to make sure that I clarified that if you were attending that meeting, I forgot to loop those people back in. But we see a 3 times greater likelihood toward building relationships and sharing the gospel if you're in service and you're in community versus if you're not participating in any of those. And that's a real important thing for us to discover. In the next video, I'll just share where I think we need your help specifically. I pray that this data is helpful and it's meaningful. It's not above your head. I don't think it is. And I am grateful for your commitment to serve. I'm also grateful to be able to ask you all to help me figure this out. God bless you, gang. Be well.